Good evening, everybody. This is our Ask the Preservationist segment. We've been doing these free webinars all summer. We've had a lot of great presenters, a lot of great topics, and we're excited to welcome tonight Heather Veneziano, Professor of Practice in Historic Preservation at Tulane University. And her presentation is going to be about cemetery conservation, preservation, and documentation. So Heather, I will turn it over to you. And, we're kind of looking for a 30 to 40-minute presentation. And then if you'd like to take questions at the end, that would be awesome. So.
Okay, sounds good. Yes. I'm just going to share my screen. And okay, I'm going to collapse this a little bit. So my presentation tonight is called Cemetery Conservation, Preservation, and Documentation. So I'm going to walk you all through those three aspects of cemetery work during the course of the next 40 minutes or so. So I have to move this again. As Clay said, I'm a professor of practice in the Historic Preservation program at Tulane. I also own a consulting firm called Gambrell and Peak. I have worked with New Orleans Catholic cemeteries in the past as a staff member, and now I do consulting work for them. And I've worked for numerous cemetery organizations throughout the state. I'm also the co-chair and co-founder of the Louisiana chapter of the Association for Gravestone Studies, Hugh Curry Commissioner, Louisiana Historical Society board member, and I've recently been named the collective for Radical Death Studies, which is a really wonderful organization. If you all are not aware of their work, please check them out. So I'm going to start with the Louisiana Historic Cemetery Preservation Act. And this really is the overall scope of how Louisiana thinks of its historic cemeteries. The repositories of significant examples of art, architecture, and archaeology, as well as containing the history of the respective communities. And I think, as they go on to say, the importance of cemeteries should not be taken lightly. These are significant elements, and they represent a substantial tourist attraction for the state of Louisiana, and they present an endless source of data for numerous people that collectively lead us to a better understanding of our own culture. So not only are these physical sites and their primary use to inter, bury the dead, they also serve all these other purposes. They're a tourist draw, which tourism, as we know, is our major economic source for the state. Then they hold a whole bunch of data that is important to a wide range of individuals. So there's a lot to glean from cemetery landscapes. These are just two photographs of St. Louis Cemetery number 2, and I will be talking more about that at the end of the presentation, but I just want to give you a little glimpse to get started. So I'm going to start off with just some basic tomb construction. I work in New Orleans, so a lot of the things I'll be discussing are more about the kinds of tombs that you'll see in southern Louisiana, but in northern Louisiana, you have more in-ground burials with headstones, which I can talk about if we have any questions at the end. But for the presentation, I'm really going to focus on the ones that I'm dealing with on a day-to-day basis. So here, basic tomb construction historically was 3 courses of bricks. And here you could see the outer layer of one, and then there'll be 2 more into the interior chamber. There's generally a course of slate for each vault. And then this, the masonry brick is covered with, it's pointed with lime-based mortar and then coated with lime-based render or stucco. As you could see here, these are the mortar joints. This is the stucco worn away. So I'm going to talk about lime-based stucco. So lime deals with the lime cycle. It starts off as limestone. It eventually comes back to limestone after it goes through the chemical process, which is for a whole nother, it could take up a whole lecture just to talk about the chemical properties of lime. So I'm not going to dwell on it too much for this presentation, but just know when I'm discussing lime-based, I'm really talking about hydraulic lime and lime sourcing from limestone. This is a picture of a tomb in Thibodeau. that I worked on. And this was a sample tomb. For this project, I was working with bayou preservation. This was a couple of years ago, and we just wanted an example for the public to see the different coats of stucco that one applies to a tomb when you're conserving it. So when we first got here, it was just exposed brick. We repointed it, put the scratch coat, and then put some additional finish coats on top. Kind of gives just a good little glimpse all at once of the different stages of building back up that lime stucco. So I'm going to talk about some conservation issues now. This photo is something, unfortunately, we see kind of often. This wall was repointed using Portland cement as opposed to lime-based mortar. This is historic brick. So historic brick is what we call a soft material. It was made from river clay. Traditionally, it would have had lime-based mortar in it. When whoever owned this building repointed the mortar joints, they used Portland cement or a heavy Portland mixture of lime. Because Portland cement is so hard, as elements hit the wall, come up through the wall, water, all kinds of things, mostly water intrusion for masonry. What it eats away at is the softest element, and the softest element on this wall is the historic soft brick. So the mortar joints remain in place, and the brick has suffered significantly, leading to structural damage here. Some other issues that we see, this was really popular, kind of mid-20th century. It's a stone veneer that they placed over a masonry wall, and it acts as a moisture barrier. So it looks nice from the outside, but possibly inside, the water that wicks up from the ground, the atmosphere, cannot escape through because the membrane is a solid one. It's not like stucco, lime-based stucco, where the moisture can kind of evaporate in and out of the tomb. Instead of, it's kind of solid stone veneer. So what happens is, again, the moisture eats away at the softest materials, trying to get its way out. So this could look structurally sound from the outside, when in reality, the inside structure is crumbling. And you find that out, unfortunately, way too late in the process, because it'll start showing significant signs of structural failure before you even notice that there's anything wrong, just looking at it on the surface. This is another thing that happens sometimes. This tomb is separating, likely from a crack with vegetation growing through it, or water intrusion again. So water really is our biggest enemy in the cemeteries. These are two examples when dealing with marble. So on this side of the screen, the marble is sugaring. So marble, again, is a soft stone, what we refer to as a soft stone, which is really great as a material because it's really easy to hand carve. And that's why it's used so frequently in the cemeteries historically. After the Industrial Revolution, granite became much more widely used because it's a harder stone, it'll last a lot longer, it's not subject to so many conservation issues, but you have to carve it using machinery. So when you're hand carving, marble is great, but because marble is so porous, it really sucks in things from the atmosphere. So sugaring can be caused by acidic elements like acid rain. It could be caused by just pollutants in the air that affect it and throw off its pH balance. It could be caused from biocides being sprayed around the tomb. There's unfortunately no way to reverse the process of sugaring. You can arrest it by using a chemical consolidant, but that will only stop it from getting worse. It will not get you back to how it was originally, unfortunately. So when you get to this point, there really is no return. With the tomb on the left, that is biological growth, biological staining, and that generally can be taken off with a very light cleaning solution. It comes off pretty easily. And it's something to worry about if it sits for a really long time. It could cause damage to the stone, but in general, it's not really causing too much damage, just doesn't look the way we want it to look. These are two more examples in dealing with marble. This picture here on the left, you can see this rust mark. That's because this stone was pinned in place. So there's an interior pin keeping this panel of marble connected to this one. And over time, the pin rusted out. It'll absorb and contract depending on atmospheric conditions, and the rust will cause it to expand as well. And then you'll get this staining that occurs. You can take it apart and put in usually like a fiberglass pin, or a stainless steel pin, but fiberglass probably is better, and then clean off the rust. But if you leave it in place, eventually it'd be causing more and more damage and then crack out. You can see it already has, let me pull this over here. It already started to cause a crack on the side of this tomb. And so it becomes a structural issue over time. So you'll see a little bit of a crack, you'll see the rust coming out, and then pieces will eventually just get worse and worse in breaking apart because of the rust. On the other side of the screen, you see marble tablet bowing. So tablets usually are quite thin, sometimes even less than an inch, about like 3/4 of an inch. So a lot, when it's bowing like this, again, there's nothing you can do to reverse it. Oftentimes families replicate what's on the tablet, put a new tablet on the front, sometimes place this tablet on the side, and sometimes just keep it off-site in a secure location and just replace it, because eventually, as this bows more and more, it will crack and then it will break off. So this is caused, there's many reasons. Again, marble is a soft stone. Over time, it's really just being held in place with this one bolt. So all the weight is just here. So the stress of that will cause the marble to bow. Also, water will cause the marble to bow. A lot of it depends how thin the cut is originally, how it was quarried, whether it was a good quality piece of marble to begin with, how much stress it's taking on the tomb. There's a lot of things that lead to this issue, but again, unfortunately, there's no way to reverse it. This is something all cemeteries have to deal with often. So this tomb is in Valence Cemetery in New Orleans, and there was a tree growing out of it. It was cut, but you can see just this small tree has already buried itself into the ground with its root system and started putting stress on all of these stones in the front corner, causing them to move. For this, you would have to totally remove the tree and the root system, or I kill the root system to a point where you are confident it won't come back, and then rejoin all the stone work. But keeping on top of regular maintenance for tree growth is extremely important. I'm going to show you this next photo. This is a tomb I'm going to talk about towards the end of the lecture again, but this tree likely started off as a seed that fell from a bird or the wind on the top of the tomb. It planted itself. The root system now goes all the way to the ground, and the tree limbs are coming out of the side of the tomb. This is a society tomb. It's 5 vaults high. It's in St. Louis Cemetery number 2 in New Orleans. But luckily, I have a success story for this later on. But you never really wanted to get to this point. So again, as soon as you see any vegetation growth, you want to be sure to remove it, because the longer it stays, the more integrated into the tomb structure it becomes. So anything that you see from the outside, you can be fairly confident that the root system is equally as large underground or within your structure. And what it does in cases like this, it not only goes to the ground, but it also goes through the various vaults of the tomb. So to remove it, which again, I'll talk about later, is going to be a very challenging project. This is even further afield in that same vein. This is an image of a cemetery. It is completely overgrown with vegetation. This is in Caldwell Parish in Louisiana. So a lot of cemeteries that are abandoned, there's no one to go in and remove the vegetation. Eventually, the vegetation will just reclaim the cemetery. And we lose a lot of cemeteries like this. I think people would be surprised at how many cemeteries are just completely engulfed in the vegetation of the state and are lost. They might get found later on, but I think it's really important, again, to do regular maintenance to never let it get to this point. This is a little view of a headstone or a monument within the vine work. This was the summer when I visited, so generally clearing projects do not occur in the summer. There's snakes, there's all kinds of things you have to deal with, so the winter really is the best time to go in and do a clearing if you encounter one of these and if you have permission to clean it. That's another thing in Louisiana, a lot of people don't know. You can't just kind of do whatever to a tomb or even a cemetery. You have to find out who the owner is. If it's an abandoned cemetery, you can contact Louisiana State Historic Preservation Office, and they will help you to determine ownership. But it's challenging because there are a lot of abandoned cemeteries in the state. I'm going to talk a little bit now about documentation. So again, this is very New Orleans centric, but I think all these things are replicable and they can be done across the state and really across the nation. So between 1981 and 1983, in collaboration with Save Our Cemeteries, University of New Orleans, and the Historic New Orleans Collection, the Survey of Historic New Orleans Cemeteries was created. So they selected 9 historic cemeteries in the city of New Orleans, and every single tomb, a photograph was taken of it and survey information was filled out. So it was literally thousands of tombs. It was a massive undertaking, but what it leaves us is a really great record of a tomb from somewhere between those couple of years. And data from the inscription tablet was recorded, as well as conditions that they saw at the time. So they'll talk about symbols or decoration on a tomb, material and condition, the location, and again, that transcription information. This information is really valuable now because a lot of these tablets are no longer legible or they're gone completely. So this really is a wonderful resource to be able to read what was on a tomb before that information was lost. So in 2012, the Historic New Orleans Collection undertook a project to digitize the survey. So they worked with students from Paris and between 2013 and 2014 to develop a beta version of a database that would later evolve into the current database that's hosted on their website. So a lot of the students transcribed many of the index cards for some of the cemeteries, as well as staff and volunteers of Save Our Cemeteries here in New Orleans. I became involved with the project through Mary Lou Kristovich and John Stubbs. We visited St. Louis Cemetery number 2. And because so much information was lost in that cemetery, we were thinking, like, how can we potentially start a database that houses the surveys from the early 1980s? And we found out the HNOC was already working on it. So I stepped in and helped propel that and get to go a little bit faster. So we applied for a grant and work began in earnest in 2016. So it was then a collaboration between the Historic New Orleans Collection, Tulane School of Architecture, Tulane School of Law, and my preservation consulting company. So I served as the project manager, and also I created the data points present on interactive aerial maps for St. Louis Cemetery number 1 and St. Louis Cemetery number 2. So now it exists online as the New Orleans Cemetery Database. It houses the survey information for St. Louis Cemetery number 1 and St. Louis Cemetery number 2. So every single photograph that was taken within those 2 cemeteries in the early 1980s is on there. All of the transcribed interment, all of the transcribed inscription tablet data is also present within the database. You are able to search a number of ways, a simple search and an advanced search. You could also search by aerial map. When you find a person, if you search in a person's name will come up. It will also list everybody else interred within that tomb. It'll show a photograph of the tomb, as well as scans of those original survey cards that were completed. So again, these are the two search functions: search by the name of the memorialized person or search by physical tomb. There's a lot more that goes into this database. I'm just going to show you some of the things because we won't have enough time. But so you could search this way. This is the advanced memorialized search. So you could search by cemetery, by last name, maiden name, first name, year of birth, year of death, place of origin, or military service. Aside from genealogical research, this is also good for just pulling data sets. We've had students in Tulane School of Medicine use it to pull yellow fever data. So they were looking for people that died of yellow fever. So they were able to use the database to kind of build a spreadsheet that contained that information. This is what the aerial maps kind of look like. You can open this up, click on the roof of any of these tombs, and then information on the sidebar will come up with a link to the previous pages that showed everybody listed in the tomb, the photograph, and then those survey cards. Last year, I worked with the Center for Public Service at Tulane University. Sarah Tankersley, who's in the audience today, helped me with this. We managed a class of undergraduate students who were transcribing the information for St. Joseph Cemetery number 1 and number 2. So they had all of these survey cards, and they took all of the information about each of the individuals, and they put it into a spreadsheet that will eventually be translated into by the web developers over at the HNOC to be incorporated into the database. So the next cemeteries to be incorporated will be St. Joseph Cemetery number 1 and St. Joseph Cemetery number 2. And also, aside from genealogical and data sets, I think it's also great because it has the photographs and you're able to look at conditions that were present in the early 1980s and compare them to present day, which is really valuable. So many of you in the audience are probably familiar with the WPA survey of cemeteries done in the 1930s. Unfortunately, that survey did not include photographs. So just think how amazing it would be if we had photographs from the 1930s, then 1980s, and then now. It would give us a really broad spectrum of the conditions and how they change within the cemeteries. But we can move forward in that direction. So hopefully photographic documentation will occur way into the future. So 1980s will be our jumping off point. But if we continue with photographic documentation, we'll have a really great record moving forward. I was also involved with a site survey of St. Louis Cemetery number 2. So for this project, I created a site plan and condition analysis for approximately 1,500 tombs spanning 3 city blocks, if you're familiar with the cemetery. So the data fields that I used mimic a survey that was completed in 2012 by UPenn and their preservation program. So I wanted to use the same exact data sets so that way you can compare the differences between their work and the work now 11 years later. And it is somewhat significant how much has changed even in such a short amount of time. So for this project, this is when I first started really getting into digital documentation of cemeteries. I had done survey work in cemeteries in the past, but most of it was just like with a clipboard and a survey questionnaire that I had built for myself and just going around marking it on paper and then translating that into a digital format. But for this project, I decided to use ArcGIS Survey 123, which is free if you're using it for personal use, or I think it's $100 a year. Maybe if you're using it for personal use, if you're a business, it costs $500 a year for the whole ARC Esri suite. But it's a really great tool. I was introduced to it by the National Park Service when I worked on a survey project for them as just a volunteer. And I saw that they were using it, and I decided to utilize it for this survey. And it's really great because I was able to build out a survey that included 34 data points. So everything that I took from the 2012 survey, and then a couple extra things that I thought were important because my client was New Orleans Catholic Cemeteries. So stuff that would be important to them, such as if it has perpetual care or not. So Square 1 had 448 tombs, Square 2, 483, and then Square 3, 497. I did not do the wall vaults because that will be a second part of the project, but it's a good amount of data and a good glimpse at a specific point in time. So, and it's nice to be able to, I think, replicate earlier surveys as closely as possible, so that way you can compare them. So the largest thing the most important thing they wanted to focus on besides the condition assessments was whether or not a tomb had perpetual care, because that means that the owner at one point in history paid a lump sum, it was put into a trust, and then New Orleans Catholic Cemeteries uses the interest off that trust, off that money, to care for the tomb in perpetuity. So only 35 out of 448 tombs in Square 1 have perpetual care, 56 in Square 2, 28 in Square 3. So when you're thinking about cemeteries in Louisiana, not many have perpetual care. For New Orleans Catholic Cemeteries, perpetual care program started in the 1940s. This cemetery dates to 1823. So it's a very significant amount of time that the tombs were not under there was no perpetual care program. If a tomb is completely restored, they can enter it into perpetual care program. So from that point on, it can be cared for. But I think having these numbers is really important, just so they can understand, okay, what do we have to do to kind of resolve a lot of the major structural issues that are going on in the cemeteries. So again, in Louisiana, it's the tomb owner's responsibility to care for the upkeep of their tomb. But in some of these more historic cemeteries, when you're dealing with early 19th century, late 18th century cemeteries, a lot of these families have either died off completely or moved away, and there is no one left. So at what point does that then become the responsibility of the cemetery operator? And I think there's a lot of lines that can be made for that. Sometimes it's like, okay, it's a liability, then we should step in. Sometimes there's all kinds of reasons, really, but it's good to have a baseline understanding of why the cemeteries are in such poor shape around the state. Well, some of them are in such poor shape around the state, and a lot of it comes down to lack of ownership information about a lot of these structures. So that survey of St. Louis Cemetery number 2 grew into a project to digitally map all 13 of the cemeteries managed by New Orleans Catholic Cemeteries. So using volunteers and student workers, we go in with that same software. I build out a survey for each individual cemetery using similar questions, but for these, we do not include the condition assessments. It's just strictly, let's document it. And this is being done because for so long now, as in many cemeteries across the state, you're just dealing with paper maps up to this point. And paper maps can be very challenging. They're challenging to integrate when you're building out burial software and you want to map things to place. It's also hard if you're a family member visiting and you want to know where your specific tomb is, especially if the cemetery office is closed and you're not really sure. So this project in the future, when everything is published through their website, you will be able to look at it on any smart device or computer. You'll be able to search by 34 different terms, the family name. You can also click on the roof of each tomb, and then that information will come up as well. So it's really going to be a game changer in terms of access for locals who are visiting the cemeteries, access for people from afar who want to gain information about certain tombs, but they might live out of state or out of the country, and they can't physically be there to see it. So for this survey, here's some of the examples of the paper maps that we're dealing with. And so I'm building it all out using Survey 123 and ArcGIS. There are off-the-shelf kind of cemetery softwares out there run by cemetery software companies. Plotbox is one of the big players in that. But all of these companies are dealing with in-ground graves where it's 1 or 2 interments and that's it. Because of the unique cemetery landscape with the tombs and dozens possibly interred within a single tomb, the off-the-shelf version just would not work for us. So I think that's why finding an outside solution was the best way to go. It's more financially feasible, especially because we're taking advantage of a lot of volunteers who want to help, which is fantastic. I love having volunteers help. So it keeps things affordable and you're able to do a lot more. And I think it also brings just more care to the project because people are taking their time to do this because they care about it. And I think that's a really beautiful thing. If you could hire an outside company to come, they'll scan your cemetery, if you have an in-ground cemetery, and they'll mark everything out for you. But if you have specific data sets you want to include, and if your cemetery kind of differs from the traditional, you kind of have to mark your own path. So New Orleans Catholic Cemeteries owns and operates 13 cemeteries within the greater New Orleans area. 12 are in the city of New Orleans. Altogether, it's about 107 acres, which we are working on mapping at the moment. So for each of the tombs in the 12 cemeteries, because St. Louis 2 was already completed, these are the data points that we're collecting. So a volunteer will stand in front of their tomb with their smartphone. They'll pull up the app and it'll have a bunch of questions for them to answer. They'll also take a primary photograph and then additional photographs, which usually are of all the sides that they could access, and detail shots of each tablet and all the information on the tablets. We did a webinar for Louisiana, for the Louisiana Trust for Historic Preservation, and that's on their website already, talking more in detail about this process. So if you're interested in it, and if you're interested in replicating it for your cemeteries, take a look at that video. So in the future, these are the cemeteries we'll be mapping. I'm currently mapping St. Joseph Cemetery number 1 with students from the course Irish in New Orleans, taught by Dr. Laura Kelly within Tulane Center for Public Service. So they are working with me every weekend now to map St. Joseph Cemetery number 1. So next year, we're going to address St. Roch Cemetery 1 and 2. And I hope to get St. Joseph's number 2 completed this year as well. The other important part of the puzzle, I think, and when dealing with cemetery landscapes, aside from documenting the physical landscape, it's getting really good scans and documentation of the records. So there's a number of transcription projects and scanning projects happening right now in New Orleans. I'm working with the city archives and New Orleans Catholic Cemeteries and the Archdiocesan Office of Records to scan a number of interment books held at the city archives that the Catholic Church does not have copies of, but they are books about the Catholic cemeteries. So we are currently scanning them, and we have volunteers that are transcribing that information. So the scans as well as the transcribed information will be available through the city archives website in the future, but that's an ongoing project as well. A lot of these scans are already on FamilySearch.com, but they're not searchable and they're not in color. Some of them have really poor resolution. So I think this will be a really wonderful addition to that landscape of records. This is one example of a scan page. So they're really high quality. You'll be able to zoom in and see really in depth, which is especially important if the handwriting is difficult or if it's a word you're maybe not familiar with. On Family Search, it's very limited in what you are able to view, but with this project, you'll really be able to like deep dive in. I've also built out a research and records tab on the website of New Orleans Catholic Cemeteries that holds quite a bit of information about records out there in the world that are pertinent to the Catholic cemeteries of New Orleans that are not necessarily held by them or the Office of Archives and Records of the Archdiocese. So that's a great place to work. I also worked on the additional resources tab for the cemetery database, which includes some resources for other cemeteries within New Orleans, not just the Catholic ones, showing you past surveys, where to go for more information, some books on the topic, other databases, and archival material that could be important for your search. Here are just a few that are important for New Orleans Catholic Cemeteries records, but again, a lot of these kind of apply to many of them. Orleans Parish page of the US GenWeb project. The US GenWeb project is fantastic source of information, especially if you're researching cemeteries. So again, take a look at this on New Orleans Catholic Cemeteries website if you're unfamiliar with it, because it really is a great resource. So back to this tomb. This tomb is the Society of Arts and Craftsmen tombs in St. Louis Cemetery number 2. It's one of 10 society tombs that I have identified for a conservation trades program. So it'll be, we meaning New Orleans Catholic Cemeteries. I say we, even though I'm just working for them as a contractor now, and the New Orleans Master Crafts Guild are going to launch an apprentice trades program to address some of this. We are starting on this tomb later this week. Actually, we're putting up scaffolding. So 2 months ago, the rear cornice of this tomb fell because of the tree roots reaching through the rear of the tomb. So it was already on the list to be addressed, but time is really of the essence now. So that's going to be launched again later this week. And then save the date, because on November 9th, they are going to have a gala celebrating 200 years of St. Louis Cemetery number 2, and all proceeds go towards the restoration of that cemetery. So 200 years is very significant, and the cemetery is a vitally important one for the history of the city. The World Monuments Fund has called it the finest cemetery, laid out in an octagonal grid. The NAACP has called it the largest collection of outdoor monuments dedicated to the lives of African Americans in the country. So it's extremely significant, and I'm really honored to be part of the team trying to work on restoring it and bringing it back. So please join us on November 9th if you are able to. Here's just some contact information for me. My email address, my website, and then my Instagram. I'm always up for answering questions or just brainstorming with folks if they want to get in touch with me. There's a lot of work to be done in cemeteries, and it can be challenging, especially because there's not a lot of funding that goes into cemeteries. So being really creative about how you approach conservation projects, I think is really vital in the larger conversation about being able to preserve these sites accurately and efficiently. And that's it. I got exactly to 7:40. So I'm happy to answer any questions anybody might have. Oh, what is the cost of perpetual care in the chat? It differs based on the size of the tomb and the cemetery operator. But it's pretty affordable. Generally, for a 2-vault tomb like the ones you see everywhere, it's generally under $5,000. And caring for it in perpetuity with that amount, I think, Because if you're going to restore a tomb that size, it could be, 10 to 15,000, maybe just a one-time restoration. So knowing that you're putting money in and that you never have to do a large scale restoration, I think is great. And now new tombs within cemeteries, if the cemetery offers perpetual care, it will be built into the contract, which I think is good so you don't end up as a cemetery operator with all these tombs in bad condition in the future.
Have you ever considered doing like a sponsor tomb to help care for some of the older ones that don't have anybody anymore?
Yeah, so Save Our Cemeteries had a tomb sponsorship program in the past, I think. New Orleans Catholic Cemeteries has what's called the Abandoned Tomb Program. So for that program, people can donate money to tax write-offs. They're a nonprofit, and they put that money towards tombs that are in really, really poor condition, have no known owner on file, and have not seen an interment within the last 50 to 75 years. So when I was working directly for them, I would go and identify tombs that I thought were good candidates. So if we got donations coming in, we would throw it at that tomb. We've done so many tombs in the last 2 years, really a ton in St. Louis 1, some in St. Joseph, some in St. Louis 2. It's really the tombs that I identify as like, how do we make this money go as far as we possibly can? So if the tomb is so far gone that's just like a pile of bricks, generally the money is better spent with something that's like on the cusp. Like if we don't address this now, it's just going to get way worse and there'll be no coming back. So when I'm identifying tombs to use those kind of funds for, it's generally those that it's like, if we don't catch this now, we're going to go to the point of no return with it. But it's hard. It's a tough sell. Like I love cemeteries, but I also realize that people are way more likely to fund the living than the dead. So people will give to education, they'll give to health issues. But even though cemeteries are an amazing cultural resource, they're amazing for history, they're amazing in so many respects, finding funding for like grant funding and other things is challenging. Tourism money does go into restoration, which is fantastic. A lot of the tombs that New Orleans Catholic Cemeteries is restoring is coming directly from the tourism revenue that they're taking in now. So they're able to do a lot more restoration work, which I think is really wonderful. They're also using lime-based plaster, lime wash, all breathable materials. So no Portland cement entering the cemetery through that program, which is good. Jessica asked, is there a point of severe degradation where the organization steps in even without family support? Sometimes. If it has a known owner, then we generally don't. They generally don't. The society tombs that we have earmarked for the apprenticeship program, the societies have long disbanded, so there's no known owner. But really, if there is an owner, they're responsible for the tomb's upkeep. But if it doesn't have an owner, again, we identify ones that we think the money can go the furthest to help. For the society tombs, they're just so large that, yes, Pam, I will share a PDF with you. The society tombs are so large that without a large program, like we'll never get enough small donations to address a whole tomb. So I picked 10 of the largest and in poorest condition in St. Louis Cemetery number 2. They span all 3 squares. And those are the ones we're going to run the apprentice program through. The first tomb is the pilot tomb. I think it's also very fitting that it is the arts and craftsman tomb that we're starting with. But the transformation is going to be really astounding. I'm very, very excited. It's been a 5-year wish for this, for me to get this started. So I'm just thrilled that we're able to actually move forward with it and that we're out of like the really super bad heat. So the guys won't be suffering too much out there. But stay tuned for more information about the apprenticeship program because we'll be publicizing it more in the coming weeks and months.
Heather, I'm sort of on the genealogy side and dealing with documents and all that side and scanning it. And but it occurs to me that, there's a zillion people that are into genealogy. And I wonder if there couldn't be, if there isn't already some kind of a program or a plan to maybe better gather and descendants who might be willing to put money towards their tombs, their ancestor tombs, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Anything sort of awash like that yet? Is ancestry.com, facilitating anything like that? I don't know.
I wish that they were. I think with the more digitization of records, the more people get interested. And a lot of times when I was working directly for the Catholic cemeteries, families would contact me and they would say, I just found out my ancestors are buried in one of your cemeteries. I had no idea. And a lot of them did move forward with raising funds within their families to restore the tomb that they just located. I think a lot of these tombs, just people aren't even aware they exist and that they have ancestors buried there. So I think the more information we can get out and the easier we can make it, the more people are going to step forward, because people in general are really interested in where they come from and their history. And I think it's just like making the access a bit easier, and through like the digital mapping and then the scanning of the interment records, I'm hoping for more of that, because it's happening more and more every year. Every year that I worked for them, I would get more and more people. Like the more I would put out digitally on the website, the more people would contact me and say like, oh, I just found out I have a tomb. And a lot of them were from California. They're from all over the country. So it was really beautiful to have them come and, reclaim their ancestors and learn their stories, more importantly, because they have the tomb, but then they're also learning all about these individuals, and like just seeing how their lives are shaped by the past and by their families is really a wonderful thing to see unfold. I've met many wonderful people through the process. It's also nice because people who had moved, families that have moved far away, generally have photographs, where people who have stayed locally do not, because they have lost it in hurricanes and other issues. So one woman from California, she had photos of her ancestors in the late 1800s, and we were able to look at them. And just like when you walk the cemetery, you see all of these names inscribed, but you don't really know the people. So seeing the photographs and doing the research and really hearing their stories, that's what keeps me going and keeps me interested in cemeteries. It's a very long answer to your question, but I'm hoping, we do a little bit more every year. It's not as fast as I would like, but nothing ever is as fast as I would like it to go. Anyone else? And the people that watch us on YouTube, feel free to email me. Again, I'm happy to answer questions.
All right. Any other questions? Anybody else?
This is great. Thanks so much, y'all.
You're welcome.
Very good.
Thank
All
you,
right.
for
Heather.
coming.
Thank you for joining us.
I'm so glad to see all these friendly faces that I know. It's great.
Thank you. It was interesting. I'm good.
Thank you all very much. And we have one more remaining segment of Ask the Preservationist, and we will be sending out information about it soon. So thank you all very much for joining us, and have a great night.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I
hope it was okay. I was
Yeah, no,
like,
that was great.
I've not slept in a long time, so I'm just like stuttering.
Okay.
But
Email me your mailing address so we can mail you the check.
okay, I'll do that.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Very much. Nice meeting you.
Nice to meet you too.